All right, hello and welcome to this Facebook Live. Now, through the course of this live, we're going to be essentially asking the question which is on your screens right now. Is India key to Trump's South Asia plans? I'll tell you why we're asking it. Because, well, after the 9 p.m. in US time, of course, global primetime broadcast of what Trump's stand on South Asia is, what his Afghanistan policy is, well, all of that has been put out, right out there, by Donald Trump. Now, the original policy obviously used to be Afghanistan, Pakistan, or the AFPAC region. Now it seems like Afghanistan, Pakistan, India. India, based on his speech, plays a key role in all of this. What we're going to do is we'll give you some snippets of what he said, and then we'll speak to the experts and keep this open for all your comments. You can ask your questions because we're going to have someone from Gateway House joining us on this live. But listen in to what Donald Trump had to say.
We can no longer be silent about Pakistan's safe havens for terrorist organizations, the Taliban, and other groups that pose a threat to the region and beyond. Pakistan has much to gain from partnering with our effort in Afghanistan. It has much to lose by continuing to harbor criminals and terrorists. At the same time, they are housing the very terrorists that we are fighting. But that will have to change, and that will change immediately. No partnership can survive a country's harboring of militants and terrorists who target U.S. service members and officials. Another critical part of the South Asia strategy for America is to further develop its strategic partnership with India, the world's largest democracy and a key security and economic partner of the United States. We appreciate India's important contributions to stability in Afghanistan, but India makes billions of dollars in trade with the United States, and we want them to help us more with Afghanistan, especially in the area of economic assistance and development. We are committed to pursuing our shared objectives for peace and security in South Asia.
Well, so those were essentially two snippets or two chunks, relevant chunks in terms of what Donald Trump had to say about Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. But to put it in a nutshell, President Donald Trump has ruled out the hasty withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan. The decision marks a complete change in stance from Trump. The U.S. president during the campaign had promised to reduce troops in Afghanistan and focus more resources at home. In his speech at the U.S. Army base in Virginia last night, which is where we were playing those chunks from, Trump insisted that an early exit from Afghanistan will lead to unpredictable and unacceptable consequences. Trump also hit out at Pakistan and said that the country has been a safe haven for terrorists. He called upon Pakistan to do more to tackle terrorism, and he also acknowledged that India's contribution is massive to the stability in Afghanistan and asked for more help in the area of economic assistance. He also said that developing a strategic relationship with India is a key focus area for the United States. Now, India has welcomed Trump's determination to fight terrorism and promised support to the United States. China's also responded, well, groups in Pakistan also responding. But just to discuss all of these developments, we're joined by Sameer Patil from Gateway House. He's a fellow National Security Studies and Director at the Center for International Security at Gateway House. Sameer, thank you so much for joining us on BloombergQuint.
My pleasure.
Sameer, I want to ask you, the key question, which is what we were asking just before those bites played out as well. Is India now key to Trump's plans and to the U.S. administration's plans for South Asia and for that South Asia policy that was much awaited?
If you look at his remarks and given what Donald Trump's worldview has been, I think yes, India remains a key for his South Asia plans, and that's also a function of the kind of what should I say, the relationships that has the current state of relationships with Russia, with China, and with Iran, which are the other key regional players for the Afghanistan conundrum. I think therefore India becomes the key partner for this. And the second is also the shift that he outlined in his remarks from a time-based approach to a conditions-based approach. And unless the conducive conditions are created for the US withdrawal from Afghanistan, there will be no peace in the region. That's what he believes. And I think therefore to create those conducive conditions, India's role will be important.
Right, and and when it comes to India's role, Sameer, it becomes more interesting because this could have certain geopolitical ramifications as well for the region, because we've seen how China has now, just a short while ago, come out and spoken about how Pakistan has been dealing with terrorism in the region. There are factions in Pakistan who've commented as well. Obviously, our MEA has come out with that statement as well, saying that they welcome this. But it's interesting considering all the ties at play here, considering India's ties with Afghanistan, considering what's happening between India and Pakistan and India and China, and how this seems like a sort of a change in stance by Donald Trump. And he conceded later on in that address as well, if we were to play that whole clip, was essentially that what he believed as an outsider was his stand on Afghanistan and pulling out troops from there. Well, that changes when you're in the Oval Office.
Absolutely. And look, one thing is absolutely clear is that looking at the experience of the United States as well as the international security force in Afghanistan, there are countries are really reluctant to take on the military responsibility for Afghanistan. India has been a very reluctant, is very reluctant to take on that kind of responsibility. So President Trump's focus on the economic assistance is really working well for India, because India would be keen to expand that kind of engagement, because China is also expanding that kind of engagement in terms of infrastructure and connectivity in the region, Afghanistan, Central Asia, Russia. So I think in that sense it plays out well for India. And if you see 2 months back, India had activated an air corridor between India and Afghanistan, because Pakistan is not allowing the overland transit of the Afghan goods to India. So in that sense, it's important that India takes on the role of the economic assistance. And I think therefore there's the geopolitical importance of this role.
Right, Sameer, and what I was alluding to earlier, well, essentially, in response to Trump's pledge or his speech, the Taliban statement is something that we have out here as well. Essentially, them saying that the U.S. should have thought about withdrawing its troops from Afghanistan instead of prolonging the war. And their statement seems to be, it looks like the U.S. still doesn't want to put an end to its longest war. Instead of understanding the facts and realities, Trump still shows pride for his power and military forces. And, well, the statement went on to vow that Taliban forces would keep fighting to free Afghanistan of American invaders. Now, from what we understand from Bloomberg pieces out there, that in terms of military deployment, it's not specific, but in terms of what Mattis has the authority to do, it's a 50% increase. So that would be nearly 4,000 more troops. And billions of dollars, Sameer, have gone into this war in Afghanistan. So according to you, when you study this situation, do you think it's a wise move?
Well, you also have to take into consideration the fact that only the U.S. troops which are being talked about, which will be another 4,000 plus more, but there is a large presence of the U.S. Special Forces and the private defense contractors who are out there in the United States, and there is also a resolution support mission, which is the successor of the International Security Assistance Force, which is another 13,000 troops. So in that sense, yes, these troops are there and they are carrying out some of the important work. But also the fact is that if you look at the previous approach of the previous administration, the Obama administration, which had talked about the withdrawal, Taliban essentially just waited out in Afghanistan for the US troops withdrawal, and then they essentially increased their lethality of their attacks. And now that the US has talked about, Donald Trump has talked about a shift from a time-based to conditions-based approach, I think Taliban is in a very strong position right now, given the fact that they control now more area than what it was in 2001. And the fact is that there is also the authority of the national government of Afghanistan is contingent upon the equations with the warlords. So they are taking advantage. So the Taliban is taking advantage of that fact. So yes, Taliban is in a very strong position and is just waiting for the US to essentially to get what should I say, tired out of this game, but and they can do that by ratcheting up the attacks on the troops as well as the other international troops which are there, which will then increase the unpopularity of any of the Afghan policy move.
Right, and when it comes to two particular statements, the ones we played out in the beginning, just to reiterate, it was kind of interesting the way he worded that, because various sections of, the Republican Party, a lot of them have come out in praise, instant praise on Twitter, even Paul Ryan, everyone saying that this was a very strong, resolute AFPAC policy. Essentially, Sameer, his stance was interesting because he first seemed to acknowledge that Pakistan is fighting with this problem, but then he also goes on to say that, well, you cannot be a safe haven for terrorists, and he also takes the sort of ground where he says that we've been paying Pakistan billions and billions of dollars, at the same time they're housing the very terrorists we are fighting. When it comes to India, he obviously acknowledges it, and especially in light of the Indian Prime Minister's visit to the US, he says, we appreciate India's important contributions to stability in Afghanistan, and of course, a lot of money, India makes billions of dollars in trade from the United States, and we want them to help us more with Afghanistan. Very, very different positioning, very different, although it came in and around the same time in that speech. But do you think in India, when we're actually watching this, to consider the key takeaways being one, that yes, the US does acknowledge yet again that Pakistan does house these terrorists and it's not acceptable whatsoever. Is that one key takeaway? And how can India really up the ante and support the US in this fight, or collaborate really to maintain peace and stability in the region?
I think one thing is very clear, that India will not participate militarily in any of these in Afghanistan. What it can do, which it has tried in the past, is to give some kind of military hardware, if not directly through the third party. For instance, it had tried to do through Russia. So that approach will be probably now more intensified. The second is obviously increasing the economic engagement, because there is a clear distinction which is being made about against Pakistan's disruptive role in the region to India's constructive role, and India would like to harp on that particular thing by increasing the economic engagement. And second thing is, I think India can probably convince Trump administration about having really a regional approach. Iran is an important player in this game, and given the fact that the kind of relations that right now are there between the United States and Iran, probably India can nudge the Trump administration to at least have some kind of modus vivendi on Afghanistan with Iran.
And does this change our policy whatsoever, Sameer? Do you think it changed our policy in terms of our policy towards Afghanistan really in this whole situation? Because that's what he's called out for, essentially.
I don't think it will change, but maybe yes, certain elements that we would of the policy will definitely be more intensified. As I said, economic engagement will be there, and the provision of the military hardware, that will be probably now more emphasized. And I think the interaction between the Trump administration and the Indian administration on these security issues will be now talking about really the operational matters, because India doesn't want to take that military responsibility. So then what India would be willing to do is to share information on the operational matters with the United States.
Right, and also, Sameer, if there were any key takeaways from that, is there something perhaps from a policy standpoint that we could have expected? Because the world was watching this whole announcement with bated breath. And of course, it was interesting to note how he acknowledged how imperative India is to the whole plan. But perhaps, is there, also considering how China has come out and issued some sort of a statement through official, outlets out there, do you think it's kind of an interesting situation that's panning out? Because considering what's been happening at Doklam, Leh Ladakh, between India and China.
Absolutely. If you see, one of the reasons which was speculated by the Indian strategic community about the Doklam crisis was that India getting closer to the United States, and the fact that the crisis broke out essentially at a time when the summit between Trump and Modi was happening. So obviously this further reinforces China's perceptions on India-US relationship. But it in a sense also, what should I say, even though China has issued a statement on Pakistan defending its fight against terrorism and its counter-terrorism contribution, I think there will be certain introspection within Beijing in terms of really whether they are riding a right horse in the region, a horse which can throw them also away at any time. But at the same time, they have invested billions of dollars in that country. Because if you see, in terms of the cutting of the coalition support fund from the United States, what Pakistan has done is that that the coalition support fund, which was coming from the United States, it constituted a very important part of Pakistan's, Pakistan's financial reserves. But now that those funds are cutting, Pakistan has deftly turned towards China, and all the investments which are coming from China to the China-Pakistan economic corridor are being used by it. So in that sense, I think even if it forces some introspection in China on the the validity of its investment, I think that would be a big achievement.
Right, also Sameer, is interesting because just to take one last point, well, we seem to have addressed the first question of our discussion, but one point is interesting, and we were trying to speak to a lot of our colleagues about this yesterday, a lot of people in the policy community as well and in international affairs, essentially being, if you go down on Trump's timeline, and considering Trump's address yesterday, well, if you go back to one of his older tweets in 2013, actually says, and I quote, "We should leave Afghanistan immediately, no more wasted lives." And then this is a flip-flop because all of a sudden during the presidential run, seems like, perhaps some advice was given to him there back then, and he actually told CNN in an interview that he would leave the troops there begrudgingly. Believe me, I'm not happy about it. And on Monday night, he sort of acknowledges that his view has evolved over the years, and he says, "My original instinct was to pull out, and historically I like following my instincts, but all of my life I heard that decisions are much different when you sit behind the desk in the Oval Office." Now, this is what he told everyone yesterday from his address in Virginia. So this seems like a flip-flop when it comes to a stand on this whole AFPAC policy.
Well, for us it may appear as a flip-flop, but I think we have to always distinguish between the rhetoric of a candidate, whether it's a presidential or you're doing a parliamentary elections,
right,
and a rhetoric of a official or a leader when he or she assumes the office. I think there will be always a sea change in their positions, and as Trump himself alluded, and you also have said, that once you sit behind a particular desk, you realize what kind of dynamics are there in any key decision making. But it's also important to understand that that he was frank enough to admit that. I mean, we have seen world leaders, talking about these things as if, that the transition from their original position to the newly held position appears to be completely natural. But at least here, Trump was, in a sense, much more frank in admitting that, yes, what I told as a candidate was different, and what I'm doing as a president is completely different.
Very interesting, Sameer. I think that's a fair point, because in all this criticism that we've been hearing all over the world, that's a fair point to bring up, because it's in this world of retweets, tweets, likes and shares, well, everything's become transparent, and hence perhaps that ensures a little more accountability, and it's happened in this case as well because everything's out in the public domain, so it's better to be clear about it. Thanks so much, Sameer, for joining us. We'll be in touch with you more as there are more developments on this topic, and thank you so much for joining in on this Facebook Live. Essentially, well, the question we were asking was, is India key to Trump's South Asia plans? And it seems like the answer from everything that happened earlier today and also from our conversation is yes, it is. So thank you so much for tuning in, and stay tuned to BloombergQuint for more.